Lukey, please. Oh, Lyle, welcome. You've been watching the process. We've got about 10 minutes. We've got your written submission, which you can assume that members have read. So welcome once again. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the chance to speak to the bill. So my name is Lyle Taylor. I'm a ChCh resident, and I'm also the convener of the annual Seismics in the City events, which have been running for a year since 2012. Well, we know in the wake of the quakes of 2010 and 11, we've had response and recovery, and now it's the turn of regeneration. The 3 R's, and perhaps time to get back to some of the basics. I'd like to reflect on the different meanings of the word regeneration. For example, in biology, the restoration or new growth by an organism of organs and tissues that have been lost, removed, or injured. In other words, an internal organic approach to repair and growth, not an external grafting on. Or in electronics, regeneration has the meaning of a feedback process in which energy from the output of an amplifier is fed back to the grid circuit to reinforce the input. In the words of Edward de Bono, the essence of feedback is that the effect of an action is fed back to alter that action. This sort of regeneration depends on raising the depleted energy levels of the people of ChCh, which in many cases have degenerated along with much of the city, by a systems approach to capture and reinforce their positive inputs, and also to take account of negative but constructive feedback. We all know that city regeneration is not just about building tangible structures, though it's good to see some emerging on the skyline. They may be the most visible signs of progress, but it's really also about developing the intangible assets, a city's public spirit, its self-image, how it sees itself, its attitude to creativity and innovation, its trust in the powers that be, its access to genuine, open, two-way communication. And the strength of our city's intangible assets will be reflected in the health, viability, prosperity and sustainability of the city. As Marvin Weisbrod said, people will support what they help to create. And I'm sure you've been hearing from other people that many people have felt disempowered because of their quake and their post-quake experiences. There's a need to rekindle the kind of engagement and enthusiasm of share an idea, but at a different level. The level of sharing a vision, sharing strategies. And the present press campaign is helping there. But the strands need to be woven together into a meaningful pattern with some higher level thinking, which is the point of our annual Seismic in the City forums, which involves representatives from the public, private and community sectors. Because we know it's the people of Greater ChCh, and especially young people, if we can retain their talents in the city, who will have to live with the results of present decisions. So we're building a new legacy for ChCh based, we hope, on shared visions and strategies, but perhaps those have been rather hard to see in recent times. A well-designed and well-executed envisioning and engagement process is community building by itself. While there's been some post-quakes consultation in some areas, it has been ex post facto after the event. Ticking the box on a, quote, consultation box after surveys with a limited range of options is no substitute for real engagement and prior input about different scenarios. Looking at partnerships, yes, there must still be national and regional partnerships. But the front seat of the tandem should be occupied by locals with the job of steering as well as pedalling. And I'm heartened by the recent announcement that Andre Lovett will chair Regenerate Christchurch and have a focus on the long-term planning picture and strategies, all of which start with a vision, a big picture. More than 5 years on from the September quake, it's time to revisit the blueprint and some anchor projects in the light of what we know now. In this regard, Andre uses the term refresh, not wholesale change. At the very time of the original 100-day process, the term blueprint, an industrial descriptor for an organic process, preempted healthy, open public discussion on a range of scenarios. And you could argue that since then there's been an over-focus of attention inside the frame on part and not the whole of the city. And while this laid the groundwork for some interesting and timely private developments, it also caused more than a few developers and tenants to feel perhaps they'd been framed and to think outside the box in ways which have created new nodes of growth not foreseen by the blueprint designers. Recovery, speed and momentum may be important, but direction is the key. Sometimes it's best to develop an existing tactic into a new strategy and not work the other way around. Legislative provisions, the continuation of some of the more draconian special post-quakes provisions in the bill is highly questionable. What may have been appropriate legislatively in the immediate aftermath of the quakes may well not be appropriate now. By being embedded in the proposed new legislation, these provisions weaken its regenerative intent and may actually also affect the locally led rebuild. Some would argue that even having a Minister for Earthquake Recovery is redundant at the stage of regeneration. If the role is to stay, regeneration needs quite a different style of leadership than may have been appropriate in the post-quakes response and recovery process. The current bill is perhaps the last opportunity to build a flexible legislative framework to reflect and enable a true sense of community, capture the sense of promise and excitement, creativity and innovation, which the rebuild offers us if we do it right. But a lot of the energy has been the fringe festival of recovery. It's been ignored by the major players. It hasn't been on centre stage. To quote Andre Lovett again, I think the time is right, and I think that when we look at what has been achieved, now is the time for a different approach and a different drive forward, and I would say hear to that. The provisions of the bill before you need to reflect that different approach and give it substance and the chance to happen and involve the people of Christchurch. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. For anyone's information, the 5th annual Seismics in the City event, Building the Future Now, subtitled Collaboration, Regeneration and Innovation, is on the 18th of March.
Thank you, Lyle. Matt's got a question.
Thank you very much, Lyle. And, I'd be interested in your view through your work with seismics in the city. If I could just link you to the previous summit at Kellerman, I think one issue that gets raised about how much we're advocating for future generations to come. So I think of my daughter who's 2 years old now, what city she would like in 20 years' time. And with your experience and the work you're doing, how do we ensure we understand what a future city will look like? Let's be clear, there was parts of Christchurch City that needed regeneration well before the earthquakes, and ensure we put that in train rather than maybe trying to rebuild a city that's been in the past and lost.
Yeah, well, I think taking the longer view, the city had a cardiac problem at the heart of it well before the quakes. And there'd been a movement out to a polycentric city, which meant some of the early thinking was still looking at a post-industrial railway city, the way it went. But involving the youth is very important. I went to a debate last week with the Chamber of Commerce debating the young professionals about whether they had been kept out of the loop in the rebuild, and that's how they feel. So many other people feel. And at one of our events, in fact, last year, we had some young people from schools and polytechnics working on the electric car. They're actually demonstrating a project and the kinds of skills which will help build the future city. It'd be a great shame, wouldn't it, to build new buildings, some with great merit, some with questionable merit, but do the same old things. And so the real subtext is initiatives that were going on before the quakes, including some of ours, in terms of an innovative city or the brain plane being the home of some clever people. And it's a chance to actually carry that forward and do things in different ways, new ways of working, new ways of living, new ways of being. And many of these things are outside legislative provisions and the tangible signs of progress like buildings. Capturing that energy and spirit of youth and other people is crucial. They've got the longest time to live with the legacy. If we can build a city which is not a retirement village, but continues to have great software and other companies holding these people here because of their skills.
Eugenie?
Thank you for the submission. You say that you don't think the new arrangements will create the step change needed to drive business confidence and investment. Can you just expand on that briefly?
That probably came from my earlier comments on the pre-bill developments. But in the end, legislation by itself, or arrangements like the so-called one-stop investment shop, may sound very good in Wellington on someone's desk. But when you talk to entrepreneurs, they're the ones who want to do things in their own way. They're the ones who decided to go to Victoria Street in Lincoln, and in some cases, in many cases, step outside the frame to avoid the bureaucratic octopus. So to encourage that true step change, you've got to have a real partnership, not just between government, national, local, because after all, locally, you could argue that the City Council, is on the side of some of the negative feedback about underinsurance. It's got to involve community groups, education groups, and especially business groups in ways that you can't contain inside legislation. But you can encourage it if the legislation gives someone like Andre Lovett and the people he's going to involve a lot more input and leadership than previous citizens groups which have been dead letters.
Lyle, I'm afraid we're going to have to draw the hearing to a conclusion, but thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your written submission and being with us today. Certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Eugenie, I presume if you've got a copy of your notes, that would be useful? No, well, just Kate. Thank you.